And we're back with another episode of Friendly Conversations on PC. That's Brian Friend. How you doing, Brian?
Doing good. Visiting some friends up in Wisconsin, close friends of mine. So yeah, happy to be here. Still trying to put some content out, but also enjoying some time with them.
Well, that's good. You're up in Madison right now, I believe, aren't you?
I was in Madison actually the last 2 days. My brother lives there. Drove about an hour east this morning. So I'm kind of middle southern Wisconsin right now.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what we brought you on. We're going to talk about a little bit of Madison. We're going to talk about the CrossFit Games and a little bit different this time. I think let's talk about things would love to see the games do, or basically some changes, fixes that we want. Maybe some. Well, let's call them suggestions. So I don't know. How's that sound?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've each kind of picked a couple things from some different perspectives. And at least as far as I'm concerned, the work that I do and have done at the CrossFit Games, and the perspective that I have from some of those different jobs is has influenced the things that I'm going to choose to focus on. But yeah, they're not like super criticisms. They're just, I think, overall some, like you said, small suggestions that could make the overall experience maybe a little bit more well-rounded or digestible for people that are trying to consume it.
Yeah, and just like how you're using your background, I'm kind of using my background too. I've been to every game since 2017, minus the COVID games. But I'm kind of looking at it from my expertise in terms of being media and other sports. And also from a marketing standpoint, which I actually have I've worked in sports marketing as well. So I'll go ahead and start us off. And this is something I got from covering NCAA wrestling. And if you've never watched NCAA wrestling, when they have their championships, it's a spectacle. It's very big. And one of the big things they have, they call it the Walk of Champions. So what they do is any past NCAA champion, it's an open invite, and they bring them back to whoever host is, whether it be St. Louis, Omaha. They've had it in Albany, they've had it in Lincoln, Nebraska. But they bring back and they do basically a walk, and they just parade them around for the fans, and the fans love it, and it's a good way to connect the current fans with the past and history of NCAA wrestling and the schools. So I would suggest kind of similar what they did with, I believe, 2019 when they walked everyone, all the different champions, or not champions, all the different nations around inside the Coliseum. That they do something similar to that, but they do with past champions or legends of the sport of CrossFit. And I think it'd just be a really good way to connect the past with the present and even the future. And I think it would be really cool, especially for a lot of those OG fans. And yeah, I mean, what do you think of that idea?
No, yeah, I think that's cool. I think I would probably just be very concise with it, like the champions. In the case of,
Mhm.
the men's side, there's only 7 champions, I think, so it's not a ton of people. If you open up to legends, there's a lot of gray area and
Yeah.
whatever, but champions very clear and concise. And I think that, yeah, that would be, like you said, a good tie-in past to present to future, and something that, both the champions would appreciate, obviously having that opportunity every year if they want to show up and do it. And hopefully there's new fans every year as well that can then have a chance to meet those people and learn a little bit about the past or the history of the sport.
Yeah, I would also even like to incorporate them in the medal ceremony as well, whether it be like the past year's champion, if they're not on the actual podium, maybe having them basically like coronate or crown or put the medal around their about around their neck. Obviously, the past, if Justin Medeiros for whatever reason doesn't win this year's games, he would be the one that kind of crowned. But I mean, he might not want to do that. Who knows? It's probably be a little weird, but even then, maybe ask someone like Fraser or
Well,
Tia to do something like that.
yeah, maybe. I mean, obviously they do it in golf, the Masters with the green jacket, and
Mhm.
sometimes, it doesn't happen that often, but the previous year's champion does well, but comes up short, and then they have to go up there and
Yeah,
congratulate someone else. But for the most parts, athletes in this sport is just like in other sports. Like when they're on the field of play, they're ultra competitive, and then as soon as it ends, they're congratulatory of their opponents.
yeah.
Whether or not they were able to get the result they wanted.
Well,
Anyway, yeah, I think it's a cool suggestion, and definitely some opportunities there. I'll go ahead with my first one, which is
yeah.
changing gears a little bit, but and this is kind of a simple thing. It really kind of hit home with me during the semifinals this year because I'm not sure I'm not always sure what this is like for someone who's not like intimately involved because I've been so closely involved with a lot of these competitions, but I got a lot of questions this year about schedules. Like
Hmm.
when are athletes competing? And I think that, a very simple thing that the CrossFit Games could do is to put out clear schedules early on for fans to be able to know where and when to watch the athletes that they want to watch. Obviously, if you're talking about a specific athlete in a specific heat or a specific lane, some of those details change over the course of competition as they do reseeding day to day and sometimes even event to event. But in general, I think that if you put out a schedule earlier that says this is the run of show for the week, this is when you can see these divisions competing, these
Hmm.
athletes, these teams, whatever, the earlier and the simpler that is, it just makes it a lot more digestible for anyone who's tuning in, whether they're new or old to the sport, so that they know where to watch the people they want to watch and when and how. Um, I think that CrossFit does have some ambitions to do this, and just for whatever reason, it hasn't been as maybe as perfect or as clearly communicated as some would hope. And I think that it's a pretty low-hanging fruit that they can do that could go a long way.
Oh yeah, that's definitely something that's doable, and it would probably make that fan experience just a little bit more, I don't know, more interactive as well. I mean, it could be something as simple as they have the CrossFit Games app and make that part of the application within that app where you can just where you're given a reminder like, oh, in 5 seconds, so and so is going to be at the park or wherever at the Coliseum or whatnot. But
Well, I mean, 5 seconds is small notice. I'm
I'm,
talking about like a week
yeah,
ahead of time,
a week ahead
and
of
I
time.
think that part of the reason that they haven't done that stuff is because they like to keep things close to the chest and they want there to be an element of unknown and unknowable and surprise and to keep the athletes in suspense. And there is some value in that from the competition and the kind of integrity of what they want the CrossFit Games to be point of view. But on the other side of that is that they want the sport to grow. They want people that aren't like diehard fans of CrossFit to be invested in it. And when diehard fans of the sport are having a hard time knowing when and where the athletes are going to compete, how do you expect someone who's not that familiar with our sport to buy into what we're doing there? And and it could be simple. It could be broad strokes. You could, at Wadapalooza, they have stuff like this where it just says elite individuals will be on Flagler from 1 to 3 p.m. on
Mhm.
Saturday. And that's posted and known ahead of time. You don't know how many events you're doing. You don't know what they are. You don't know, a lot of different nuances of what's going on, but you know who's going to be where, when. And I think that as a baseline, if you could put that out for a majority, if not all, of the divisions and competition days, that you're just going to have a higher likelihood of more people knowing what they want to watch and being able to show up and watch it, whether it's on site or at home, and they can like plan their schedule around that. The CrossFit Games individual competition lasts 4 or 5 days. If you're not
Mhm.
on site at the games, how much of that are you going to watch? If you have a week's notice to kind of pick and choose, okay, well, the individuals are competing at this time. There's a big competition block on Saturday night. I know that's using the lifting stuff. I'm going to set aside time in my schedule to make sure that I watch that because it's my favorite. Like people can be predictive in that with the other things that they have going on in life, whereas the longer that you keep it a secret from the public, the more obstacles there are for people being available to watch it.
I agree. Yeah, we'll go to my second thing, and I'm going to wear a couple hats on this. I'm going to wear it as someone who knows marketing and also someone that is also in the army. But obviously, one of the main sponsors of the army of the games this year is the U.S. Army, and I always thought it would be really cool to actually have something, an event that actually directly correlated with that sponsor. We've had that in the past, obviously with Trek Bike and Crit. Whenever we did the biking events, the Marines sponsored the Battleground in 2018. But I was thinking, especially since they incorporate the Army Combat Fitness Test as an actual event. So those who aren't familiar with ACFT it was actually the workout of the day that CrossFit put on their main site for the Army's birthday, which was I believe this past Wednesday. But it's essentially like a chipper. And I would love to see our favorite CrossFitters actually turn that into an event. And it incorporates everything from deadlifts to um, there's basically a 2 mile run to end it. There's a max deadlift. There's hand release push-ups. I mean, there's so many different factors in. There's actually a plank, which it used to be the knee tuck, but I would love to see them bring the knee tuck back for the CrossFit Games athletes instead of watching them do a plank for 3 minutes. But I think that'd be just a really cool thing to incorporate, and also really cool for those sponsors. So basically, when CrossFit is given a product or a sponsor, kind of fit that in there a little bit more creatively. I mean, one of the major events last year was the Capitol. Brian, do you know who was the sponsor of the Capitol event last year?
Not offhand, no.
Yeah, not many people would, but I looked it up, and it was Quelo, the rings, the silicone rings. And I mean, that's great. They're getting, but I mean, I really don't associate that event with silicon wedding bands. But I think that would have been a great opportunity for any number of sponsors to kind of like, especially if it was directly involved with that event, to kind of tie it in.
Yeah, and it could be so simple as just having Rogue design something that's in the shape of the Quelo ring that you're carrying instead of the sandbags. And now
Yeah.
you have a kind of tie-in from sponsor to event. And I think that in the bigger picture, with not necessarily just specifically the Army, but there's a lot of opportunity to kind of weave in some of the sponsors, especially when you have so many events over the course of the competition, 14, 15, that you could pick and choose a couple to have a little bit more affiliate close tie between the a sponsor and what the athletes are doing on the field. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a cool idea. Like you said, they have done some stuff in the past, but I think there's certainly some opportunity going forward as well.
Yeah, definitely. What do you
For
got
the
for your
Yeah, second one here, and I think that a lot of mine are kind of along the same lines, which is that I think that a big hurdle with this sport is how do you make it accessible and digestible for people?
Mhm.
And I think that kind of all three of the ones I'm going to pick on here are in some way are related to that. The second one for me is have as few heats of 20 athletes competing at a time
Oh,
as possible,
yeah.
specifically in the elite individual fields. Now, when I say as few as possible, that's intentional because I don't want to say zero. There
Mhm.
are mass start events that are, I think that it makes a lot of sense for, especially some of those longer ones, some of the ones where the men and women are doing the same things that obviously have some great storytelling elements of them because the women quite often do very well, if not beat the men. And so I think there's some room for that. But what comes to mind for me is just the events on North Park that are in the 5 to 15 minute range,
Mhm.
and you have 20 athletes competing at a time, and more often than not, whether you're watching on site or you're watching at home, it's really difficult to keep track of everything that's going on. 10 seems to be a lot more favorable number, and obviously I know that there's a massive logistical element to the
Mhm.
CrossFit Games, and there's a ton of athletes and a ton of workouts that you have to get through. But when you come down to it, it is the elite individual athletes that are driving the interest there. And I think that at the start of the week, you just want, or when you're setting out to design that week from a logistics standpoint, set out what you want the individuals to do, allow for enough time for heats of 10 on North Park in the Coliseum, unless except with the exception of like the wall walk thruster where they turned the field horizontal instead of
Yeah.
vertical. There almost always heats of 10 because it's in the Coliseum. But again, even with that workout, like I think that it's a far better storytelling for the audience if there's heats of 10. Then you can have more understanding of what's happening, who these athletes are, what they're doing, and then it builds upon itself. One like think about chaos. One heat, 40 athletes, and I get why they wanted to do that there. But
Mhm.
how many of those athletes could you really appreciate what they were doing, whether it was good, bad, or otherwise? It just dwindles down to the couple at the top, and then everyone finishes, and then the couple at the end, and that's
Yeah.
kind of all that anyone can digest. So, I think if you want, if you want to do a favor to the athletes and the viewers, heats of 20 generally don't do the trick.
No, I agree. And like you said, those longer events, they have a tendency to kind of work itself out where there is, you are seeing a lot more separation. But I think a good example of that is last year in the wall ball dumbbell, what was it? What event? What was that? Where
Hat trick.
Yeah, hat trick, where it was such a quick event. Yeah, you obviously Ellie and Guy did really in that, but you couldn't really tell me who did well after that. And plus, it was not only was it several, only two heats, but it was a couple, it was a few rounds. But it just ended up becoming chaos, and especially from you, being on the broadcast, I'm sure it's a lot more difficult to kind of like, key in on certain individuals or any individuals at all.
Yeah, it's been talked about a lot that when, if you want this sport to spread in terms of people that want to watch it,
Yeah.
it has to be easy to watch.
Hmm.
And by the nature of it, it's harder to watch than most sports. There's more variables, there's
Yeah.
more differences, there's more nuances going on. But anytime that you can simplify the equation to make it understandable, and one of the ways you can do that is by having less people doing the event at a time, I think you should consider that option. And based on the last, well, pretty much all the years that we've been at Madison, when there are events that are 20 heats or 20 individuals per heat,
Hmm.
I just think that you lose a lot of the storytelling, the
Yeah.
digestibility, and the appreciation for what's happening on the field of play.
Yeah, I definitely agree. All right, my last one. This is something I've been playing with in my mind. I've even actually brought this up to a couple people at CrossFit. Is showcasing the teams on Thursday night in the Coliseum. Now, obviously, every night it ends at the Coliseum, and it's usually the individuals that go. And the big thing is, well, on usually Friday or Saturday night, or typically it's been Saturday is when that's the big lift. My thing is, I would, they do a big lift typically with the teams as well. And why not schedule that big lift event for teams at the Coliseum on a Thursday night? That way, they get their time to kind of shine. And plus, it'll, if you're really going to push this team division, at some point you're going to have to showcase them. And it also gives an opportunity for fans to come out and see someone like Tola or Andrea Nisler or Taylor Williamson or any of these awesome team athletes. I mean, you have Ben and Alex Smith that are going to be competing. Just put them on put them on prime time and show off their strength and their skills. And that's something that I've always wanted to see. One, to promote the team division, and also promote the athletes within the team division, and show that there are some great heavy lifters and athletes in general in the team division that just aren't competing individual for whatever reason.
Yeah, maybe there's a chance that they're considering that actually. If you
Mm-hmm.
think about the semifinal structure from this past month, where they had the teams
Mm-hmm.
finale as the closing event on Saturday night. Obviously, their
Yeah.
competition started and ended one day before the individuals in North America and Europe, so they had to be creative with that. But they could have had the team division end and then the individuals be the nightcap. They chose not to do that. The individuals wrapped up their day, then the team had a final event, and that was their time to have the stage there to finish out their competition and earn their games tickets. So maybe there is some precedent based on the semifinal schedule that they'll do something like that.
Yeah. Well, let's hope. And what do you have? What's your last suggestion?
Well, this is a little bit of a tricky one. There's certainly elements of this that would have to be fleshed out, but um, the idea here is that I don't think that the athletes at the CrossFit Games that are competing in the later heats should have the chance to watch the athletes competing in the earlier heats.
Hmm.
There are a lot of things that happen at the CrossFit Games that the intent is your ability to respond to something that's new, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's a new implement, whether it's a nuance of a workout that might not be completely understood. And sometimes it's just a matter of, oh wow, the turf on the North Park is hotter than we thought it was. Maybe we should put these gloves on. But
Mm-hmm.
the athletes competing in the first heat, you know, in general, they're not as fit anyway. And if you just go watch any you know, entire event from semifinals, you'll see a crescendo of talent and fitness as the heats wear on.
Mm-hmm.
The better athletes are competing later. If you layer on top of that the advantage of watching the early heats go, then you're doubling down on the advantage that the athletes get in the later heat. And then they factor in the time to beat that they also know. And the time to beat is something that's very nice for the audience to know, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a huge advantage for the athletes to know. In the history of the CrossFit Games, there are a few times where they've taken the athletes into seclusion.
Mm-hmm.
you know, Before the 2014 final with
Yeah.
Thick and Quick and then the double grace, and going back to I think 2011, they did it before the final workout, where they seclude them underneath this tennis stadium there and bring them out slowly. I don't think it has to be that like bunkered down of a situation, but having TVs in the warm-up area or having, coaches who have their assistant on the floor that's texting them what's going
Mm-hmm.
on out there, and then them really relaying to the athletes saying, "Oh, let's just take the case of North America East semifinal this year with test number one.
Hmm.
This test was a bit of a mystery anyway, and the big mystery was what is that sled going to be like?
Yeah.
Well, everyone gets there and they see what the sled is, but they still don't know what it feels like to pull it. Well, if you're in heat two or three, which is based on your quarterfinal ranking, and you see that everyone in heat one struggling, now you can game plan for that, whereas the heat
Hmm.
one athletes didn't get a chance to.
Yeah.
So I think, so I think we could flesh out enough examples that we wanted to of how this is advantageous. So the complication becomes, well, how do you prevent them from having access to that information? And I think it's pretty simple really in practice. You just have to be prepared for it. And I do, and I don't need to necessarily talk about how I would go about doing it. That would be for the CrossFit Games team to figure out. But what I do think they should ask is, does it if we're able to find a way to do that, does it enhance the story that we're ultimately trying to tell of who's the fittest? Because I think that the athletes that are already the best are getting an extra advantage by being able to see and hear about what's happening on the field of play before they go and take on some of those tests. And I
Hmm.
think if we could limit or reduce that, that we level the playing field a little bit and have a better overall result of who is actually responding to or conquering the test that's before them without necessarily having an advantage that maybe doesn't have to be, included.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because again, those people in those earlier heats, especially we don't know if there's going to be a cut in this year's games or not. They're already at a disadvantage. They're already, they're against it already, and now they have to worry about getting cut. And obviously, you have some opinions on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a favor in favor of cuts in general at the games. I think that what you end up having there is variable scoring tables and then variable fields of athletes, and so certain tests can be skewed in certain directions. Um, I've talked about that in the past, so I didn't choose to have it on this list, but
Mhm.
yeah, and then if it comes down to, the kind of these things I was talking about, and there is a cut, you come to that
Yeah.
last, let's say there's going to be a last workout before the cut, and
Hmm.
if there are parts of that test that end up being things that you might not have been able to know until you're in it, and you're in the first heat, then the people in the second heat or third heat or fourth heat have that information, then it get like I said, it just gives them an added layer of information that can be advantageous to a situation that's already, you know, potentially in their favor. I mean, they have more points coming in. So, yeah, overall, I think the answer of how would need to be a conversation. I think it's possible, and I think that it's worth the CrossFit Games team investigating because I think that overall it would just create an elevated level of competition in terms of truly assessing who's the fittest one out there.
Yeah, and once again, these are just three things that me and Brian, we've six total that we would recommend or suggest. If there's anything that you would recommend or suggest, just put it down to comments and let us know. We'd love to hear, and who knows, maybe in a future episode we'll go through those and see if those are actually pliable or capable of being done. But I don't know where to next, Brian. What do you got going on?
Oh man, just kind of I'm working on a few different things. There's still some stuff from semifinals I'm looking at, and I'm starting to bleed that over into games prep. I've got some kind of fun things I've been sitting on that I think I might release here in the next week or so. Having some content over there with Talking Elite Fitness, some articles coming out, and then just trying to get everything in order for the game so that we can, execute on what we want to do there.
Yeah, well, yeah, just keep on checking back on B.Friendly, our website of B.Friendly Fitness. And when you go there, go ahead and check out our core collection. These beautiful shirts that myself and Brian are wearing. These are actually part of the semifinal. Right now, Chad Mueller, our resident chief brand officer, I'm not sure exactly what his title is, but he's working on our games collection, which we're hoping to be premiering and debuting here soon, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So head on over, get the last of the semifinal collection, shop for the core collection. Also, if you want to continue on seeing videos like this with me and Brian and asking those hard questions or putting out those awesome suggestions for CrossFit, just like, subscribe, and also we have a Patreon page. Please head on over if you want to continue on supporting us. We'd love to have you on there and and do more cool stuff like this. And again, as always, like, follow, subscribe to get alerts on all the new videos on this channel. And, you know, Brian and everyone else, be friendly, our friends.